Swedish stock market is actually a fantastic market in the sense that it's been one of the greatest stock markets during the last 100 years and even 50 years. And I think the reason for that is that Sweden is a small country, very small country, just 10 million people in a world of 7 billion. We have our own currency and we have a lot of world-leading companies, and we're a big export nation. That's make these companies global, which also mean that the Swedish stock market, in a sense, is a global stock market. So I would in general describe Sweden as a very good and healthy stock market. One can wonder why you should be invested in Sweden since it's a small country and it's a part of the European Union or even the world. Why do you focus on Sweden and not Europe or America or something like that? I think if you focus on Sweden, you also focus on the rest of the world, because Sweden's stock market is so global and most Swedish companies are selling their products in Europe, in Asia, in America. So in that sense, to invest in Sweden is to invest in a global stock market. So you don't need to buy European stock or Asian stock or American stock, because if you invest in the Swedish stock markets, you do that. I mean, we can have Ericsson for one example. They're selling just a few % of their business in Sweden, but they're world leading, number one in their sector. And Volvo is one of the biggest truck makers in the world, almost as big as Daimler and Fiat and Packard and Navistar and all those companies. And if you invest in them, even if they are in the Swedish stock market, most of their sales are outside Sweden. So I think to be focused or invested in Sweden is to be in a global stock market. If you look at, for example, Carnegie Fonder and you compare it to a European fund or American fund, you have to remember that investing in Sweden, like I said before, you invest in a global companies and stuff like that. But I think we as a Sweden portfolio management has very easy to get in contact with all the companies we invest in. We know the board, we know the owners. Sweden is a small country and it's a very open country in that sense that you have much easier to get information. You can get hold of almost anyone, the president, the chairman of the board or anything like that. And I think Sweden also is a very good country in that sense. There is almost no corruption. The sustainability is very high in the companies we invest, and in Sweden in general. I think Sweden is one of the best countries in the world in that sense, that you can talk to companies and tell them to move a fabric, or if something bad happens there, or to just make them change people in the board if you have too many men or example like that. So I think that to be a portfolio manager of stocks in Sweden, like Carnegie Fonder, is also something unique in that sense that you live very close by these Swedish companies that are global. And I think a global portfolio manager can't find that in Sweden because Sweden is such a small country for them, so they don't care about Sweden. I mean, it's been a decade of stock market moving up, not only in Sweden, but also in America and in all of the Western stock market, if you can say that. And that's, of course, the 10 years after the finance crisis. So looking back now, you can say that if you look at the year end here, 2019, 2020, it was almost all-time high on most stock market in the world. But I think you have to remember that a lot of it, I think, is well deserved, because it's an effect of the rates going to almost zero and companies holding up their profits very well. And if you look at Swedish stock market now, I think the price is like 16 to 17 times earnings. It used to be 14 to 15, so it's a bit higher. But on the other hand, rates are almost zero, and they used to be a few % over time. And if you look at the bubble like 2000 or maybe 2008 or 2007, if before 8 that created the bubble, we saw a lot higher valuation than we did today. So I think valuation a bit higher, but that's because of the rates. And you pay 16, 17 times earning, that's not so bad. You have a yield on the stock market on almost 3.5%, and you have zero on the bank. So I think even if the stock market is flat, you have 3.5% in dividend, and I think that's very attractive. Sweden also have very strong balance sheet. If you look at the Swedish stock market they almost don't have any debt because there's a lot of people with big net cash, a lot of companies, not people, with big net cash. And there's a few companies with a little debt. But strong balance sheet, they can buy other companies, they can do share buybacks, they can do spin-off, and which is a very large trend coming here. It started in the US, coming to Europe and the Nordic now in Sweden. We saw last year a few spin-offs. There's going to be a lot of them this year. And I think that Swedish stock market is in a good trend in that sense. The companies are feeling well, the balance sheets are strong, the valuation okay. Of course, there will always be setbacks in the markets. That's the point of being in the market. But if you're looking forward, I think Sweden is a fine and attractive market for the moment. I think in the long term, Sweden is a fantastic country to be invested in. There's a lot of natural resources, and I think the large forest in Sweden is very interested in a future environment where we talk a lot about sustainability and things like that. And Sweden has a lot of natural resources, and in the stock market there are a lot of very big and attractive value forest company, for example. We also have this strong international companies like ABB, Volvo, Atlas Copco, for example, Ericsson and Electrolux, like I mentioned before, Ericsson. So you can say a country full of natural resources, very good sustainability, very good political system, and a country with its own currency. That makes Sweden very special. For an international investor, you can of course say that Sweden is a part of the Nordic region, and that's true. Although the Swedish stock market is so much bigger than the rest of the Nordic countries. So I think to be invested in Sweden is fine because you get this globally and Nordic touch that you need as a European or international investor. Thank you for listening.